I think marketers who are using AI actually need to be very careful, because I think if they start creating lots of content and claiming it's their own, and especially if they're saying I spent hours and hours of work to create this, and then it's not that hard to find out at the moment that you haven't, you'll lose the trust of your audience. But more importantly, I think the real lesson, because I think most marketers, most creators, most business people are spending lots of time creating things by themselves, they should highlight that, because people will value things far more. So we learned two things from that study. One is that people don't like AI generated content. But the second thing, which I think is maybe more interesting, is that AI generated content, when it's not known, can still be preferred more. So people can prefer it more.
Hey, welcome to the Message Market Fit podcast. I'm your host, Chris Silvestri. This is the show where we chat with B2B SaaS folks, marketers, product leads, growth owners, and founders about how they join the conversation already happening in their customers' mind. We unpack how they think, how they research, and how they shape messages that actually move the needle. No fluff, just systems, insight, and strategy you can actually use. Quick note before we dive in. This podcast isn't sponsored. It's supported by Conversion Alchemy, my own consulting business. So if you're listening and thinking, I wonder how aligned our messaging actually is, check out the Message Market Fit Scorecard. It's a free diagnostic tool I built to help B2B SaaS teams pinpoint exactly where their messaging might be breaking down. You'll find the link in the show notes.
I'm really excited about my guest today, Phill Agnew. Phill is the host of Nudge, the UK's #1 marketing podcast, where he breaks down behavioral science and psychology into practical insights for marketers. I got a chance to chat with Phill actually for 1 hour at the Marketing Meetup conference in London a while ago, and we ended up chatting everything except marketing, from long-distance running to meditation. So it was nice to use the podcast to dive into some of the nerdy stuff. In this episode, we chat about the psychology of effort, the myths and realities behind priming, how to use social proof correctly, why stories work, and Phil's entire journey from product marketing to running one of the most respected marketing shows in the UK. Let's dive right in.
Hey Phill, thank you so much for being here. How are you?
Very good, very good. Very excited to come on. And yeah, really honored you invited me on. Thank you for having me.
Nice. Yeah. So we had a bit of a chat. What was it? The Marketing Meetup in London. And we shared a couple of things. But I was recently impressed, and I want to start this conversation with a question that I think sums up your obsession and your kind of fascination with psychology and decision making, which is that you walked 52 kilometers to attend a conference, and I want to know why. Let's start here.
Yeah, very good. Very good way to start. I feel like I do want to correct you, because I thought it would be 50.
Okay, because what was more?
My watch started walking, ended up being 61, and believe
me,
my
God,
those final 9 kilometers, when you've got blisters the size of tennis balls hanging off your heel, I could really feel them. But no, it was, why did I do this? Partly because I'm a bit mad and I quite like these sort of silly challenges, but I'm a big believer. I spend a lot of time studying psychology and behavioral science in particular, and studying how the human mind makes decisions and how we're influenced in different subtle ways. And one of the things that I've learnt about a lot through talking through the researchers and through reading the literature is that people tend to highly value the effort you put in to something you create. This is known as costly signaling or input bias or labor illusion in some scenarios, where essentially the more effort you put into something, the more people will value it. So cracking example is if you're trying to ask your partner, or if you want your partner to marry you, and you rent out a Rolls Royce, take them down to a 5-star Michelin restaurant, and then do a seaside sunset walk and then get down on one knee and propose, the chance that they'll say yes is far higher than if you take them for a Happy Meal at McDonald's. And that is literally because you are putting so much more time, effort, resource into the message you are communicating. And so I thought about this a lot with conferences, and I thought, how can you create a talk at a conference where people can really see all of the effort that you're putting into your talk? Obviously, you can do a lot of research, you can create really good content, but for the conference I was going to, this wonderful conference down in Poole called You Are the Media, created at You Are the Media, there was very good speakers there, really high quality speakers. So I knew I wouldn't be able to stand out that way. So I thought, what would be a really wild way to stand out and to showcase a lot of effort? Why don't I just walk there from Bristol? That was my idea. I'll walk to Poole, which is in the south coast of the UK, near Bournemouth, and I'll walk from Bristol. And I looked on a map to do this, and I suddenly realised it was like 120 kilometres, mainly down motorways, and I would have to like wild camp or find some sort of dodgy hotel in the middle somewhere. And I thought, I actually don't think I can do that. So instead, the train travel between these two cities is like awful. You have to go via Southampton and Reading or something ridiculous like that. So I thought I'll get the train to somewhere that's close to Bristol, but gets me on my journey, which was Salisbury. And then I walked down from Salisbury, and then I sort of had this wonderful experience. It was a really nice sunny day, thankfully. And then I could create this talk, which was part, here's the psychology of the input bias and costly signaling and how effort influences our perception. And then matched it with all these stories that I came across on my walk. So the donkey that tried to kick me, the holiday park that I stumbled into, the funny shop names that I saw in some random small town, like all of these sort of small things, these small stories, and I weaved them in. And yeah, it was a great way to do a talk, and I really enjoyed it, and I think the audience enjoyed it as well.
Awesome. And did you probably had the talk prepared before the walk, right? So were you able to weave all of these things that you've observed in the talk as you went there, probably exhausted after the walk? How did it go?
So the talk had a structure. The structure was around how effort influences. And I think I had 4 parts. The more pain you experience, the more people value your work. There's studies which show that. The more time you put into something, the more people value your work. There's studies to show that. The more you love something, so as a creator, if you love something and you share that love, I really enjoyed doing this. So this wonderful study by Danny Zane, recent 2024 study, he did a set of 4 studies with his colleagues where he essentially got creators, people selling on Etsy, Facebook, SEO consultants, publicizing their work on Facebook. He would do 2 variants of this study. Half of the time they would say, here's what I'm selling, please buy it. And half the time they would just say, I love what I'm doing, here are products I'm selling. For example, I love being an SEO consultant, an ad for the SEO, or the best example of this was a chef creating a brownie, which they ran separate studies in a school cafeteria. And half the time the chef would say, this is the most popular brownie. So classic social proof. You would assume that would work because social proof is a very powerful nudge. People like to follow the actions of others. But in the variant, the chef simply said, I really loved creating this brownie. And they found that variant actually drove more people to buy. So when you say you love something, people enjoy it more. So I was saying how much I love the talk as well. And then also the more effort you put into something as a creator, the more you actually enjoy it too. So it has a cycle, a self-fulfilling cycle. So I had all of these studies and all of these examples set up, but then half the talk I knew would be stories from the walk, and I had no idea what those stories would be. I didn't even know I'd make it. So it was risky. And I didn't bring my laptop with me because it was too heavy. I basically started walking up and down the roads outside my house with my laptop in my bag, and I was like, I will not survive. I'll come in with a crooked back and I'll be walking on my hands and knees. So I spoke to Mark, the organizer. I was like, can I just use your laptop on the morning? He's, yeah. It sounded really unsure. And so basically my talk was at 10, and I think at 9:45 I was on stage desperately trying to upload my pictures to the talk. And it was wild because usually for a talk you spend hours and hours preparing and rehearsing, and I was clicking next slide and I couldn't really remember what pictures I just shoved in, and I didn't really know if they would even be in there. Has that saved properly? So it was very high stakes, but very rewarding.
Nice. Yeah, forced you to optimize on the go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool. So I want to go back to the psychology of effort and all this stuff a bit later, but first I want to understand your path, your trajectory. So you had roles mostly in product marketing, I think, at companies like Hotjar, Buffer, Brandwatch as well. Yeah. What drew you to product marketing first?
Yeah, pure serendipity, really. I was at Brandwatch. I joined Brandwatch, I think, in 2014. Very junior marketer straight out of university. I was a community manager when I first joined, a junior community manager, which was a wonderful job, but is definitely bottom of the food chain in terms of marketing. It's like, we're not even going to let you post on social media. We're going to let you write things that might eventually end up on social media. It was that sort of level. But I really enjoyed it. It was a wonderful place to work. And eventually a product marketing. I loved the tech we created at Brandwatch. Some much smarter people than me created a social listening tool, which essentially allowed companies who used Brandwatch to, and this was before Elon Musk took over Twitter and ruined the game, but essentially read every message being shared about that brand online in all of the public places. Reddit forums, Twitter was a big one, some parts of Facebook, and then lots of blogs, news articles, that sort of thing. And so it's incredible. It was like, if you wanted to, 2016 was the time when Trump was doing his first campaign. It was like, you could really see what people were saying about him and how people were reacting, and in a way that sort of no one else was able to do at that time. So I really fell in love with this product, not simply for listening to views about strange political leaders for many other reasons as well. And because I fell in love with the product, I was always drawn into product marketing, which of course is the role where you're probably most linked to product as a marketer, especially in a tech company. So I ended up getting into product marketing that way. And during that period of my career, did struggle a lot with marketing. I'll be honest. I'd spent 4 years at university studying marketing strategy, learning about the 4Ps, learning about how to create marketing that resonates, and got into my first job and was asked to do things like write an email subject line that gets people to open it, or create a blog that encourages people to click on the lead magnet at the bottom. Very tactical things that really I had no idea how to do. You're not taught how to do these things at university. And I was bad at my job until I stumbled upon the world of behavioral science and psychology. It wasn't until I learned about how people make decisions, the psychology behind what makes people want to click, what makes people want to act, that I actually started to become, I won't even say above average at my job, because I then understood the way people made decisions, and then from that, I think was able to create content that really resonated. And yeah, product marketing at Brandwatch. And then in 2020, I went to, early 2021, I went to Hotjar to do product marketing there. And then most recently was at Buffer as a senior product marketer. And then in early 2024, about the time when Nudge is my podcast, it had become the #1 marketing podcast in the UK. I thought, it's about time I go full time on this podcast thing and give it a real go. So have been doing that for the past year and a half.
Okay, cool. I didn't actually know that you started the podcast while still at a company. So what made you start the podcast, and what moved you to, what attracted you about podcasting?
Yeah, first of all, narcissism. The classic white guy. Everyone wants to hear my voice. Exactly that, but I'm sure that's part of it. I think I was on holiday. I was listening to Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat by Bruce Daisley, which was, I really like that podcast. Well produced, but another example of just, also, funnily enough, a white guy who just created a podcast on his own, and it became really successful and just quite inspirational to see someone go through that. And I knew him from his Twitter days because we worked a bit with him at Brandwatch, and thought I would love if there was a podcast like this for behavioral science. And there wasn't one specifically about behavioral science and marketing at that time. And then the weird way that it came to be is me and some colleagues at Brandwatch, so this was back in 2019, we wanted to create a digital MBA, a bit like Mark Ritson's mini MBA. We really had this idea that we'd create a digital MBA.
There's also, I think there's also Seth Godin has MBA, marketing MBA or something.
Yeah, so something that people far smarter than us were already doing. For some reason, we wanted to do it. None of us had taken a real MBA, so we had absolutely no, I don't even think any of us had taken a master's. We had absolutely no qualifications for why we should do this. We just thought, oh, why not? We should create one. And then as part of our little marketing plan, we thought, we'll create a podcast which will drive people to the digital MBA. So going about it the completely wrong way, like not having any demand and thinking, let's create something totally separate to build our demand. Anyway, because we decided that, I thought I'll reach out to some of my influencers, these people who inspire me, and ask them if they would come on a show, and recorded these. People are very kind, basically. You email someone and say, do you want to come on a podcast? It's incredible. You'll know it's Chris. How, at least back in 2019 especially, people were willing to come on, and that was lovely. So interviewed these people. And then obviously we came to our senses and thought, we can't create a digital MBA. We barely know anything about business as it is. So scrapped that idea. And then I took a sabbatical. I was in New Zealand with my partner. I was serving tables in a small town north of Auckland called Takapuna, a bit of extra money before we went and travelled around the South Island. I actually served Boba Fett from Star Wars.
No. Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah,
oh wow,
that's pretty
amazing.
He didn't tip me once, so make of that what you will. And it was during this period where I thought, I'm going to do something with these recordings. Like, it was quite nice to not have a high pressure job at that point, and I was just on this sabbatical. I thought, I'm going to do something with these recordings. I'm going to create something from them, and created the podcast. Launched the first episode in April 2019, and just over 6 years ago now, and I've been publishing pretty much every week since then.
Wow. And I know that, so the podcast is mainly, it's very storytelling focused. You, even when you have interviews, you create a story, you narrate it, and then you let the guest speak as well. So it's not like just a casual conversation. So you started with interviews and then you shifted more towards the storytelling side, or was it always storytelling oriented?
It's funny because the style is I learned this 4 years after doing it, what my style was actually called. Someone told me, you're doing narrative-based discussion. I was like, oh, okay. I just thought it was podcast. So this style, it's very labor-intensive in the sense that you record with the guest and then you edit the guest's audio down into sort of chunks and then you write your own script and weave the two together. So it becomes a bit more like a documentary. An audio documentary is how you would describe it, or narrative-based discussion if you're a bit more fancy than me. But it came out of pure necessity because I've been telling you the story about how we recorded these podcast episodes for this Digital MBA Never Happened. 3 months later, I'm left with these recordings. What do I do? We haven't had like a conversation. I've just got their audio, so I need to create something from it. So it came out of necessity. I had these recordings. I needed to do something with them. So edited their audio down into these chunks, wrote my own script, did my own research, created an episode out of the back of that. And then that became my style. The benefit of that style is it meant I could sound far more intelligent than I actually am because I can do a load of research and get some interesting points and make points that are worth listening to rather than rambling on like I am now. Sorry, listeners. And also the guests could sound really smart because I could edit them down so they could essentially only their best points would be shared, which they liked. We could get the shows down to about 20 to 30 minutes in length, which some of the listeners really appreciated. Perfect commuting sort of length, especially for quite dense behavioral science literature, which we were covering. And that style came about serendipitously, but I'm really glad it has because it's given me the freedom to create, like you said, I think some very interesting storytelling, narrative-based episodes, which I don't think I'd be able to do if I was doing the typical conversation style episodes.
Yeah. And I'm interested, what do you think makes a story interesting and how do you select your topic stories?
Yeah. I interviewed actually a fantastic best-selling author called Will Storr, who has written, I think, the definitive book on storytelling. It's a book called Science of Storytelling. He's gone on to write A Story as a Deal, Status Game, or Status Game, depending on where you're from. Very interesting. And he says, in the start of The Science of Storytelling, he says that story that gets people interested basically has two components. The first is change. Any good book, any good story starts with a moment of significant change. If you think about Star Wars, it's Luke Skywalker being whisked away to go and do something, change in your life. I'm not going to be able to give lots of good examples, but think of any story you like. Harry Potter gets to learn Hogwarts, significant change. It's somebody who is living a fairly normal life, a moment of significant change happens. So when I start my episodes, I think, what's the change? What can I hint at? What's the exciting sort of pivot which can happen at some point in this episode? So that's a really core part of the story. Another core part of storytelling, according to Will Storr, is people. We're obsessed people. We think plot might be... You often think plot is the core to a story. What's the storyline? It's not true. What people are really interested is understanding the motivations of other people. But the important thing, and this is the third section of a great story, is curiosity. So what you want to do in a good story is not show everything about a person in advance. You don't want to reveal everything about them up front. You want to keep people guessing. A good story will start with a bit of change, will introduce a person, but not tell you everything about them. So Albert Camus' Outsider starts with, today my mother died, and then he just goes on to talk about something else very quickly as if he doesn't really care about that. I might be totally butchering that quote as well, but I believe that's what it is. This is what Will was telling me on this podcast. And lots of stories start with this. And so you're thinking, you're trying to understand this person. Is this person a psychopath? Has this person killed their mother? Are they totally desensitized for some reason? And by not understanding, you're desperate to read to learn more. So
you fill in the gaps.
You fill in the gaps. And this applies directly to business podcasts in that I just did an episode with a marketer called Bas Wouters, who talked to me about the history of Instagram and how it became so addictive. And to title the episode, we didn't say the history of Instagram and how it became addictive, because that's not hinting at any curiosity. We titled the episode as something like, this one change made Instagram so successful. So there's curiosity in there. What was that change? I need to understand what that is in order to learn more. And you might think, this is clickbaity, this is a BuzzFeed tactic. It really isn't. If you go back, Shakespeare, so a lot of Shakespeare's plays were already stories which were well known. He wasn't creating these stories from scratch. He was taking stories which was folktale, very well known, and he was adapting them to his audience. The main thing he did to adapt them was at the beginning of the stories that Shakespeare was using, what the narrator would tend to do is describe all of the people in the show and exactly what their motivations are. He would say, Hamlet's thinking this and feels this way. What Shakespeare did is removed all of that and instead left some things up to ambiguity. So is Hamlet mad? We're not sure. And that made people more likely to want to watch and listen. So people have been doing this from Shakespeare's age, and it's been making good stories since then. And we shouldn't disregard this as clickbait or BuzzFeed, because this is just the science of what a good story is.
Yeah, I think the secret is not asking ChatGPT for curiosity-inducing headlines.
yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. Unless and
yes,
everything
it's
else,
not about
it's
emojis. About the business side of podcasting. This is a bit of a selfish question. When was it the time where you realized you had kind of product market fit with the podcast?
Yeah, I don't know if there was a time. The difficulty with podcasting, and you'll know this, Chris, people who have a podcast who are listening will know this, is there is no hockey stick moment. There is not this, you wake up one day and the podcast is suddenly a hit. It's very slow and often imperceptible gains over time that you can't even really measure. So it's a very slow, subtle growth. And that can be extremely frustrating for a podcast creator, because you see a TikToker, for example, go insanely viral with some very low quality content very quickly. And you've, as a podcaster, maybe been working on a niche or a narrative for years and not had anywhere near that level of virality. And it can be very frustrating. But the flip side of it is, of course, the audience you do build up with a podcast tends to be extremely loyal, extremely connected to you, because they spend a lot of time listening to you, far more likely to promote you, listen to your views, want to hire you, want to buy things from you than any audience on TikTok would be. And I've got a sort of, this is a bit of a tangent, I will go back to answering your question, but a lot of people still think that going viral on TikTok or LinkedIn is the answer. I've been lucky enough to go viral on both a few times, partly through applying some of these psychological tactics that I work on. But last year, for example, I got 1 million views on one of my TikTok videos, which I've since stopped doing, which tells you a lot about how valuable those views were.
Yeah.
But it was promoting an episode. So it was literally saying, go and listen to the latest episode of Nudge, with a bit of a hook, curiosity bias in there, that sort of thing. But we were saying off air, I spent the last year and a half digital nomading. I was in Thailand at the time, and being the Brit I am, I had quite a red nose. I burnt my nose, basically, which tends to happen to every Brit abroad, because for some reason we just don't put on enough sun cream. We always think we'll be okay, and we never quite are. So I had this red nose, and I did this video promoting, it was a show I did with Chris Voss, the guy who did Never Split the Difference. It's a really good video and a really good episode. And the video got 1 million views, and I'm thinking, I've hit the big time. My show's going to go massive. We'll be top of the business charts. I'll probably be picked up by some network. I'm going to go huge. And these 1 million views, none of that happened. The number one comment on this video said, why am I listening to this red-nosed wanker? Second comment said, oh, look, here's Rudolph giving business advice again. It's just like, it went viral, but then was immediately forgotten. The important thing is I could then go and measure exactly how many people went and listened to the episode. And it was like a couple of percentage more, no more people clicking on the email. So this is the thing with podcasting, it's slow growth. And even when you get the virality that you might crave on a site like TikTok, which is promoting your show, Jay Klaus has spoken about this as well. Jay he had 1 million views on YouTube, which is a far more reliable medium. And I said to him, what happened after those views? And he said, I literally had an ad for the actual podcast in that YouTube video, and it didn't drive anyone over that. It's very hard to get people away from specific platforms that they're on. They don't want to jump off. And this is the thing with podcasting. So it's very slow growth. It's very hard to grow. I don't know if there was a point. I think for me, it was the point where I was consistently getting number one in the marketing charts. And I thought, everybody else on this list is a full-time podcaster with a team of 3. It seems wrong that I'm topping the list and it's just me in my bedroom doing this on the one day off a week I have at Buffer, because Buffer worked a 4-day work week when I was there. And I'm not putting my full, I'm putting like 5% of my, or 20% of my attention into this. I should be doing more. That was the sort of moment where I thought I really need to go for this. But I don't know if I've ever really thought there was a moment where I knew I had product market fit. It's just the thought of, I think I should give this more attention because I think there's something here.
Did you ever pay any attention to the download numbers?
Yeah, of course. Oh yeah. At the start, obsessively. I think I was like, I remember talking to a friend of mine who's also in marketing, and we were like, the point that I think it'll be very exciting is if 1,000 people listen to an episode that I don't know, because there's no way I know 1,000 people. And I remember working towards that point for maybe 12 months or something at the start. And that was extremely exciting to get to that point. Now, I would say I don't really look at the downloads because they're very stagnant. They stay very consistent. And I know the podcasting game. I know there's no curiosity. Up the downloads 1 week, even if I've gone viral on TikTok, I know it's not going to make much of a difference. There's not much point looking at that. The things I care about is I'm trying to grow a YouTube channel, so that's somewhere I'm looking a lot at. Email subscribers would be another one, and then products I sell in addition would be that. I guess I check a bit more obsessively.
All right, awesome. Let's shift into actual psychology and behavior. So you interview a lot of experts, science experts as well. What do you think are the 2-3 psychological principles or nudges that marketers consistently maybe underestimate or misuse?
Yeah. First of all, it's always worth just explaining why these nudges work and why it's important. So Daniel Kahneman, Nobel laureate, author of the book Thinking Fast and Slow. I think the book that most people have bought and not finished, probably out of any book.
They're not finished, but they always mention.
Always mention. Yeah, I will say I have managed to finish it, but my word, it took me some time. It's a very good book, and some of the chapters are very easy to read. It's a strange one in that he explains something and then explains it in 15 different ways. It gets a bit dense. And also there's a chapter which you have to avoid because it's studies on priming. So it's a strange book to promote and read. But importantly, in the book, he talks about, at the very start, he talks about how humans make decisions. And he gives this analogy for how the brain works, which isn't literal because you don't know how the brain works. So his analogy is a guess at how the brain is functioning. It's not definitely functioning in this exact way, but neuroscientists agree that it is a good way of thinking about the brain because in experiments, you tend to see this playing out. And he gives this analogy that there are two systems in the brain. There's system 1 and system 2. One of the systems is very fast. It's unconscious. It makes decisions very quickly. And the reason it does that is because the brain is needing to be optimized. It needs to make decisions efficiently. It doesn't want to use too much energy. And so as hunter-gatherers, as cavemen, as people working office jobs in the 90s, we didn't need to think extensively about whether we should pick up that berry, whether we should run away from that tiger, whether we should go and get another coffee. Those decisions should be automatic. So we then have the capacity to think about bigger things. Where should I set up camp? Should I eat that mushroom? Should I move jobs? And that would be the system 2. So then 5% of the decisions we make are very slow and conscious. I've been spending a lot of time recently deciding what Hoover to buy. That shows where I am at my house. What Hoover should I buy? And that's very system 2. I'm deep into little specs.
The features.
The features. Oh my God, it's boring. Desperate. I'm now just thinking, just go system 1, buy the most popular one. Anyway. So those are the two methods of thinking. The vast majority of the decisions we make are unconscious. So pretty much everything you watch that's unconscious. You really think about it. What you click on a YouTube video, it's pretty much unconscious. How you decide to open an email, pretty much unconscious. What you decide to follow on Instagram, what blog you decide to read. So many of the things that marketers create are part of those unconscious decisions. We're not creating things that really make people have to think, other than in the occasional Hoover to a new home buyer.
Yeah.
And so what this means is that we use shortcuts when we're making these quick decisions. So when it's system 1, we'll use a shortcut to decide what to do. So if we see a tiger running towards us, and we've never encountered this before as a caveman or a hunter-gatherer, we will, for example, use the shortcut of following the actions of others. So if we see all the other people in our tribe running away from that tiger, we will join in. We won't wait to do a rational, logical thought about the likelihood of how much chance this tiger will have. And after us, we'll just follow the herd because that's the safest thing to do. And that's enabled us to evolve. And today, we don't have to worry about tigers, but we do follow the herd in many other things. So if you're on holiday, you're in the Greek island and you're walking down the seafront, wondering what restaurant to go to, and one restaurant has a waiter outside begging you to come in and just one table taken up on the inside by some couple which looks vaguely unhappy and about 100 spare tables, you're not going to go into that restaurant. If you then see a restaurant which has a queue out the door and every table full, you're probably going to stand in that queue to go in that table. And that's literally you following that same heuristic, that same shortcut that people have been following for millennia. So that social proof shortcut. And we do this all the time. We follow the actions of others. We're more engaged in things that spark our curiosity. We've covered that already. We showcase additional love and value for things that we put the effort into. So we spoke about that at the start. There's all sorts of other ones as well. So you mentioned at the start, what are some of that marketers tend to ignore, perhaps don't use enough. I think there's a very interesting one, which is loss aversion. So again, this is Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. And they found that losses feel twice as painful as equivalent gains. So if your boss, after you've listened to this podcast, sends you an email and says, I'm going to give you an extra £50 in your paycheck this month, you'd be like, oh, I'm probably not going to really notice that after tax, but okay, cool. If the boss sends you an email saying, I'm going to remove £50 from your paycheck this month, you'll be outraged. Sorry, what? Why? Hold on. Why are you taking away my pay? Don't get rid of something I own. Losses feel more painful than equivalent gains. Losing £20 feels more painful than finding £20 on a car park floor. And marketers can use this. So Elliot Aronson did some wonderful studies with insulation companies to out messages to homeowners in America saying you should insulate your home. Half of them talked about the benefits. So if you insulate your home, you could save 75 cents a day, while the other half talked about the losses. So if you by not insulating your home, you are losing 75 cents every single day. He found that the message that was framed in the loss framing was twice as effective as the message framed in the benefit framing. Amazon uses this very well as well. So when you try and leave Amazon Prime, they don't talk about all of the benefits you get as an Amazon Prime user. Instead, they say, Phil, we are saving you £313 every year. You will lose those savings if you try and leave. To Richard Chataway in the Behavioral Business Book, he says that reduced churn by 44%. So as marketers, we often look to the benefits. We want to share the positives people have when they use our products, but it can actually be more powerful to highlight what they might be missing out on and what they might lose if they don't purchase our products.
Yeah. And in my work as well, like 70% of my work is research, right? So understanding my clients' customers, the market, in the team conversation internally. And I've always been curious because a big part of, for example, like the first piece of copy that we typically write is the value proposition on the homepage, right? Like the main headline, like what's the big idea behind it? And I'm always trying to understand whether or not for the main headline, the audience wants to, because the first piece is the motivation, like what brings them to the page that we need to match on the homepage, right? I'm always trying to understand, are they moving away from pain or are they going towards a goal? What's the emotional direction? So to me, a big part of that is understanding the audience. Do you think, like from your experience in marketing, but also from your psychology knowledge, do you think that there's some of these heuristics that always work in all cases, or is it important first to understand the audience, and different audiences can have different approaches to how they consume marketing copy, for example, or your website?
It's a really great question. So the first way to answer it is to say that in general, heuristics are universal. We have evolved as a species to follow the actions of others, and that has helped us evolve. We've evolved to feel losses as being more painful than equivalent gains because that's helped us evolve. We've evolved to be interested in things that are unknown because that's helped us procreate, expand, and for the same reason, click on my stupid podcast episode about Instagram earlier. So in general, these heuristics work for everyone, but it is always in general. Whenever they do a study about social proof, say this is the most popular brownie, whatever it might be, you will still get 30, 40, 20% of people who don't purchase that brownie. They go for a different one for a different reason. So it's not like this affects everyone in the exact same way. And I think the important aspect that I'd like to mention in regards to your point is that messaging tends to be far more effective when we use the language that our audience already knows. The most basic is sometimes it's when you're figuring out a problem, a really smart thing to do. I was told this by someone far smarter than me, is to go to the most basic version of that problem. So let's think about personalization. What's the most basic bit of personalization we could get? Think about the room you're in right now. How could you personalize the message to the room you're in? So Cialdini did these incredible studies with social proof. Robert Cialdini, the influence. Social proof is the idea that we follow the actions of others. And he found that if you tell hotel users in Arizona that most people reuse their towels, so they reuse their towels, they don't need fresh towels every day. If you tell them that most people do this, the amount of people who reuse their towels increases. This is great. And it's more powerful. This is what's interesting. It's more powerful than talking about all the environmental reasons that people should use their towels. And that's important to think about, because sometimes when you interview your readers, your listeners, your website visitors, they will say, I really care about the environment, which they do, but actually they might be more impacted by a message which just says most people do this. But the important thing, and this is why you do need to interview your customers and understand them, is because the more personal you get, the more specific you get, the more powerful the message you get becomes. So what Cialdini did is he then compared most people reuse their towels, with a message that said most people who stay in this specific hotel room, so 37B, reuse their towels. Now, rationally, that shouldn't be more powerful because fewer people have stayed in that hotel room. Fewer people have therefore used their towels, and knowing that everybody in the hotel room reuses their towels. And yet, the more specific you get, the more personal you get, the more believable it becomes because you're using correct language, and the more likely people were to reuse their towels. So in that scenario, saying people in this hotel room reuse their towels made the guests far more likely to reuse their towels. Similar example cited in Richard Shotton's book, The Choice Factory. He was working, or I think he either cites the example, I can't remember, but it was a broadband internet provider in the UK, and they wanted to showcase that they had the fastest network in the UK. They did. It was proven they had the fastest network in the UK. And so they put these ads up around London, and they found that they were doing well, but not fantastically. So they created some variants, and the variants didn't say we're the fastest network in the UK. They said we're the fastest network in whatever location that had to be in. So for example, if it was in Charing Cross Station, it would say we have the fastest broadband right here in Charing Cross Station. And they found that message, the personalized specific message, was more impactful, was more likely to be remembered and more likely to be acted upon than the UK-wide message. And all of this is to say, this is a very specific example. All of this is to say that the more you understand about your audience, the more you understand about the language they use, the job titles they have, the pain points, the motivations they have, the more specific you can get and the more you can amplify the nudges you may try to use. So, for example, at Buffer, we could have said we are the most popular social media monitoring or social media scheduling platform. But what we actually ended up going with was something like the most popular social media scheduling platform for creators, because that was how most of our audience saw themselves, and being a bit more specific would be more impactful. So these things are universal, but it is still very important to deeply understand your customer.
Yeah, and probably the more you know your audience, the better you know which of these nudges to use in your messaging as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's possible to use many of them with the same audience. There is some findings which suggest that different cultures prefer or are less likely to fall for one nudge versus another. So in a very individualistic society like America, social proof doesn't work quite as well as a very community-based society like India or Japan. And yet social proof is still incredibly powerful in America and heavily used. If you go onto any American website, you'll find that they're constantly telling you that 5 people have just booked this hotel room. So there is examples which suggest that it does change based on the audience. But I think what you also find as well is that you just deeply need to understand your customer, and then you can pick and choose from the different psychological biases available.
Yeah. Speaking of social proof, lately, especially, in the past few years, using customer reviews has become a bit harder. People are getting more skeptical about reviews. Which type of social proof do you think is most powerful on websites, for example?
Yeah. So one thing I would say about social proof is that it is something that I think marketers don't leverage in the right way. I think social proof for a lot of marketers in SaaS or tech, typically e-commerce, typically what the original social proof was put a grayscale logo of a company or a customer on your website and have it in a floating carousel. And that was it. That they thought, oh, that's social proof. And what you realize when you look at the studies by Robert Cialdini, which I just shared, when you say people in this hotel room reuse their towels, that's more powerful. What you realize is it's not the sort of general, just ticking the social proof box is not enough. If you get more specific, the social proof becomes much more powerful. And it's relevant in a world where everybody seems to be doing the same thing. So I'm sure if I go to the websites of 5 cybersecurity companies, I guarantee you they will each have Amazon AWS as a customer or Google as a customer. I was like, it doesn't mean anything anymore. So what we did at Buffer when I was there is we took the social proof on our homepage, which originally was grayscale logos of companies, slightly smaller companies, those companies that we admired. Happy Socks was one of them, I remember that. But we removed that. We did an A/B test where we compared that with social proof that was very specific. So instead, we had reached out to our actual customers and asked them, what success have you had using Buffer? So what's your growth in followers been? What's your growth in engagement been? What's your growth in impressions been? We've got all these wonderful stories from different customers, from real people with real accounts, which we could then link to, who would say, look, I grew my LinkedIn following by 200%, or I increased the amount of views I got on TikTok by 1 million over the last month. And instead of saying we're used by happy socks, we had a little block which had that customer's profile, the channel they were using, and then the increase in engagement, impressions, or views, whatever it was, for that specific customer. And then that was on our carousel. That was super specific. So it was like, here's exactly how we're helping you. And we A/B tested this with the grayscale logos, and the specific social proof was far more effective at increasing conversions than the grayscale logo one. So social proof is one of those where I think everybody knows about it. Every marketer knows they need to include it. And yet I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding in what you can do with social proof. It is not just the case of, just say we're used by AWS. I think it's the case of actually present something, social proof, that would be important to the viewer you're trying to engage.
And one thing that I always like to try and do when I write copy for a website is to use social proof contextually as well. So when I talk about a feature and the benefit that the feature provides, then after that paragraph, I try to have a testimonial that's specific to that specific feature, so that we basically back up the feature or the value proposition of that feature right away, like right after we claim that. Did you see that works, or do you have any other examples of kind of that case?
I think backing up your claim with social proof is very valuable, because people have this natural reactance. If I claim to you that Nudge Podcast,
it creates a void.
Yeah, people don't want to believe that. They don't want to be told what to do. We don't like our autonomy being limited. So if you simply claim something and don't back it up, people will react badly. So instead, you have to say, Nudge is the most popular show in the UK according to the Apple charts last it was. That would be valuable. But the other sort of misperception that I think a lot of people have with social proof is they assume that social proof can only be used by the biggest player in the field. I can't use social. Some people will say, I can't use social proof because I'm not big enough. And that is true either, because there's an element of social proof which is known by the researchers as dynamic social proof. And they've run studies where they've tried to persuade, I think it was Texans, to eat more plant-based meat. Incredibly hard thing to persuade someone to do. Texans are really
their barbecue
for a Beyond Meat burger or a lovely little lentil slice rather than a steak. So how do you convince them to do this? They ran this really interesting study where when people were queuing for a restaurant in Texas, they interviewed them when they were in that queue on the outside. And for some of the people, they said plant-based meats are being eaten by 30%, or it was something like 25% of Americans at the moment. Is that something you'd eat when you go in? And then measured what they actually ate. Not many people ended up eating plant-based meat when they heard that. That's normal, because what you're hearing now is that most people don't eat it. If you know that people don't do something, you won't do it either. They changed it where they said more Americans than ever are eating plant-based meats. Is it something you would consider? Both things were true. So it was true before that the minority of Americans are eating plant-based meats. It's also true that more Americans than ever are eating plant-based meats. So in one, you're saying the literal total number, and one, you're saying the percentage change, the growth in interests. And what they found was that when people were told that more Americans than ever are eating plant-based meats, a much higher majority of these Texans actually went in and ordered the Beyond Meat burger. It was like the fact that they knew more people were jumping on that trend made people more interested in actually trying the food. So don't think because you are not the largest or the biggest or the most popular or the most purchased that you can't use social proof in your favor. You can. You just have to tweak it to talk about the percentage change in your favor rather than the total quantity or volume.
Yeah. Going back to the principle of effort that we discussed, talking about your walk, you recently did a great episode on kind of the priming effect, right? And like the way that I perceived it was like, wow, how many hours did he put in to do this study? Because you actually conducted like your own proprietary study for this episode to try and verify the efficacy of the priming effort. And can you talk us about this experiment that you've done? How much work did get into it and the results that you gotten?
Yeah, for the listeners, because I assume most of you won't have listened to that priming episode, and that's fine. It's okay. You can listen to it if you want, but don't tune out now, basically. Basically, priming is this field within psychology which has been heavily disproven over the last 10 years, and it's become one of these sort of red herrings, this part of psychology which is used to discredit the rest of behavioral science. So people say because priming isn't replicating, all of it must be bogus. Social proof can't exist because priming doesn't exist. And the problem with priming as well is that when it was talked about 10 years ago, it was talked about by the best. Daniel Kahneman devotes a whole chapter to priming in his book and praises it. And priming in general is this idea that people can be very subtly influenced by things that are almost subconscious to them. So some of these studies suggest that if you put green on your website and you're selling products in America, people will be more likely to buy because green is the color of money. Another study suggested that if you get people to read words that people associate with old people, so in America this was things like Florida, because that's where old people tend to retire. It was things like walking stick. It was things like pension, those types of words. If you get people to read those words, they will then walk more slowly when they leave the experiment center and they go off to get the coffee. It's bogus. It like almost, you hear this thing, so you're like, yeah, obviously this is bogus.
Okay, yeah, it makes you wonder, what are we, like robots that just something, like we click something and we act differently?
Yeah. So what a lot of researchers have found since Kahneman promoted it very heavily in his book is they replicated these studies. So the first thing is that these studies probably were accurate. Probably when they did these initial studies, they did end up getting a kind of result which found that people did walk more slowly. There's all sorts of reasons that could happen. Just the way that the experimenter might have interacted with people could have had some effect, or just a type of random chance, slower walkers occasionally. But what you need to do is keep replicating these studies to see if the bias holds. And when they replicated the priming studies, they found that basically the bias wasn't holding. When they did this study with the reading words like Florida and pension and walking stick again, people didn't slower. And so for my experiment, I think this is a fascinating story because it not only tells people to avoid using priming, which I think they should do, but it also gives people an idea of how science evolves. Science is this constant... The whole point of science is you're supposed to discover things and then find out that they are not true. That's the idea of it, and that's the idea of behavioral science as well. So it's a wonderful story in the sense that it actually, for me, makes me think that behavioral science is even more reliable than before because we're actually proving some things that aren't true. And so in my show, I decided to actually replicate many of these studies myself, show the results. So I recruited about 60 to 150 people, recorded interviews with them, and then played these interviews back for the listeners to hear and show that I couldn't even replicate these priming studies. So the classic example, one of the priming studies, which we've talked about in Kahneman's, and another one, was if you show people the Apple logo and ask them to come up with as many uses for a brick as possible. This is a classic way that psychologists measure creativity. Come up for as many uses for X as possible. And the number of uses they come up with will be a guide for how creative they are. If you show them the Apple logo, they will come up with more uses than if you showed them the IBM logo. And the reason is because Apple is seen as a more creative company and you'll be primed to be more creative after you see that logo. So I did exactly this. I showed, I think it was 50 people the Apple logo, 50 people the IBM logo, asked them to come up with as many uses for a brick as possible. I found the total opposite result. So in my study, the IBM viewers suddenly were far more creative than the Apple ones. Now, this does not mean that IBM fans...
It's a more creative brand.
It's a more creative brand. It just means that this study is pointless. What I think my conclusion from the priming field is that there is a correlation between the level of the input that has gone into the intervention and the level of the output. So an intervention which is just flashing up a logo for 5 seconds is so small that it is just so unlikely to have any noticeable difference on behavior. Whereas if I tell people that most people in this hotel room have used their towels, yes, that message is still small, but it is referring to something very concrete and significant, which is hundreds, if not thousands of people in that room reusing that towel. That's a very concrete, real, visible thing. And a very big input, if you think about it, assuming you don't lie. It's a lot of effort for thousands of people to reuse their towels. That's a much bigger thing to conceptually think about than just seeing the IBM logo for 0.5 seconds and coming up with uses for a brick. So it was a great episode to work on. It did take me a lot of time. I think I wrote the script for that episode 12 months before I published it. That's partly because I'm just a giant procrastinator and it's heaps of time and I'm a perfectionist. It's the worst combo. A procrastinating perfectionist is the absolute worst combo for any podcaster. But it did take me a lot of time. I was very happy with the results. I think it's a very good episode, but to go back to that point earlier, you look at the downloads for it and is just the same as every other episode. So you've got to love creating these shows in order to get
and I think like you never know, like maybe in a couple of months, like people start picking it up. It's there, at least it's an asset you created. And I wanted to ask you, I haven't read it, but I think the book Persuasion by Cialdini, is it about priming as well?
I was looking at it there, it's just on my wall. It's not really, no. It's some parts about priming. There's, I think the section at the start does talk a little bit about it, and if you read it, because that was written in 2016, which I think a lot, Kahneman had written his open letter saying that priming is a train wreck ready to happen. And I think Cialdini knew that a lot of the studies weren't as reliable. And when I was reading that book, I take a lot of pictures and I digitalized the notes that I like. And there was quite a few sections where I was like, I don't believe this. And exactly the example I just talked about of studies where the input is so small, and yet they're claiming that the output is so large. So the classic one, the Vince Packard subliminal messaging one, was not talked about in Persuasion, but talked about in this sort of subliminal messaging book back in the 50s, was that if you just flash an image of popcorn in a movie for 0.1 seconds that no one can even perceive, like this subliminal sort of flash, people will then buy more popcorn and more Coca-Cola depending on what you show. That's complete bogus. It doesn't happen. If an input is that small, it will not affect an output that large. If that was the case, political campaigns would not need to be run by presidents who tweet every 2 minutes to gain every ounce of attention that they can possibly get. They would just flash their face up in the middle of Simpsons every once in a while and be able to get input. Small inputs does not equal large outputs. And there is a part of Persuasion which is about that, but there's also several other parts. Like there's a very good part of the book Persuasion which is about the foot in the door technique and the door in the face technique. The worst two names for psychological biases, but very interesting. So, how you can get someone to say a yes by either creating an offer which is so small that they can't say no to it, an offer which is so overhyped, so large that they will negotiate down. Very, very interesting studies, all very relevant. Just a tiny bit on priming, which should be ignored.
Cool. A question about AI. I don't want to go too deep into AI just because we also talk about it, and I know that you are not like super like pro AI. I haven't used it a lot in your podcast, which makes you even more valuable, I think, because you appreciate the craft. But I wanted to ask, going back to effort again, I think there's two types of effort. So there's like measurable effort, like how much work people put into like the work, but there's also perceived effort. And one thing that AI now kind of creates, there's a lot of maybe fake perceived effort, because if you have AI run like a huge massive research report with the deep research, you can generate it in like literally 1 minute. People may think, oh wow, like this guy put a lot of effort into it. How do you look at the effort heuristic with the AI?
That's very interesting. Good studies take about a year or 6 months to a year, 2 years to come out. And so we're starting to see some very interesting behavioral science studies around perception of AI coming out. And one that was shared by the Blindsight author, Matt Johnston, Dr. Matt Johnston, who's been on Nudge before. I saw him share this on LinkedIn. It's a really interesting study. And in it, participants were shown 2 pieces of art. And in this video that Matt Johnston creates, he asks the viewers to look at the 2 pieces of art. One of them is a bit weird. It's not symmetrical. It's got these sort of circular lines folding out of it, but it messes with your brain a bit because it just looks out of proportion. And I didn't like it when I saw this image. And the other image it wasn't symmetrical, but it had these blocks, these different squares in similar tones and colors. They blended together. It made a nice tapestry. And I thought, with that image on the left, the one of the blocks is nicer. I picked that one. And he then says, the vast majority of people who see these 2 images pick that one. There's something about the human brain which just prefers the little bit of symmetry, and you can understand that image a bit more. Your brain processes it a little bit better, and they pick that one. The interesting thing is that image is AI generated, and that the image that everybody said they didn't like is human created. It's a human created image. And what these researchers then did is, to a different population of people, they showed the exact same 2 images. And they said, by the way, you should know that the image, which is not symmetrical, these circular lines, that is created by a human who spent 20 years crafting their trade. And the image on the left, these nice squares, is created by AI in sort of 4 seconds. And everybody who was told that said they preferred the human-generated image. But the interesting thing here, there's two interesting things. One is that when people know somebody has used AI to create something quickly and has not used their years of craft to create something, they will value it less. You will value a LinkedIn post less if you know it's been used. If AI has been used to create it, you'll value a blog post less, a podcast less, whatever it might be. So value is directly attached to the amount of effort people put in, and if you use AI, people in general will not value it as much. So just think about food. A McDonald's burger in the past has been pretty good, but people don't value it as much as a Bunsen burger from Dublin. They know that it is too quick to create. If I go and get a haircut and the haircut takes 2 minutes and I come out, I'm thinking, what the hell has he done? That's way too quick. Whereas if he takes 45 minutes and gives me a coffee, I'll value it more higher, even if the haircut is identical in both scenarios. So people, they have this direct link to effort, and AI is a great example of how this plays an effect. So we learned two things from that study. One is that people don't like AI-generated content. But the second thing, which I think is maybe more interesting, is that AI-generated content, when it's not known, can still be more preferred more. So people can prefer it more. They don't ever find out. So this, I think, means two things for creators. One is don't highlight.
Disclose.
If you are using AI a lot, you shouldn't be highlighting it. But then I think you have a problem where you have an ethical problem where I think personally in 10 years time, there will be AI generated work and human generated work, and there will be legal ramifications for claiming that you've done one versus the other. You can't create a Premier League football match and say this actually happened between Arsenal and Tottenham and it's totally AI generated. You won't be allowed to do that. That will be illegal, I think. You won't be allowed to fool people in that way. And I think marketers who are using AI actually need to be very careful, because I think if they start creating lots of content and claiming it's their own, and especially if they're saying I spent hours and hours of work to create this, and then it's not that hard to find out at the moment that you haven't, you'll lose the trust of your audience. But more importantly, I think the real lesson, because I think most marketers, most creators, most business people are spending lots of time creating things by themselves, they should highlight that, because people will value things far more. So that's my very unscientific 2 cents on AI.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. It's a very interesting landscape that we're dealing with, especially if you're on LinkedIn and you continue to see all those posts that people actually use AI for, but don't even edit on their own. Like they literally copy paste.
It is really so easy to see. I think it's not hard at all.
All right. So my last question is to try and make this a bit more practical, because I think, and even from my experience, like reading lots of books about psychology, you start hoarding in a way, a lot of these heuristics. Like I want to know all the mental models, all the heuristics and the biases, but then how do you use them? And I'm curious to hear from you, like, what's your way to actually internalize these like heuristic and principles, but then to actually use them in your work?
Yeah. So the way I mentioned at the start that I use a note-taking app on my phone. So every time I read and I find a study or I find an example that links to, say, loss aversion or social proof, I will note it down. I'll take a picture of it. I'll scan it in and I'll link it to that heuristic. And then when I am working, because I feel like I have a good grasp of what the different heuristics are, I will be working on, for example, a message to encourage people to sign up to something, to a course I've run. And I'll think, okay, in this email, I would like to test out loss aversion. I'll then load up all of the examples I have of loss aversion and find an example which I think is particularly relevant to this specific use case. So I have a bit of a head start in that space. I think there's other examples which I've seen where you can buy these flashcards, I think they are. Just working on a web page and you pick up a flashcard and it says, okay, now you should use input bars or curiosity bars, whatever it is. And you apply it that way. I don't know if that's quite the right way, because I think
it's pretty random, no?
It's pretty random, and I think as a creator, you should feel pride and a real reason to want to try things out and test them. I also think it's really important to test. So I think in these examples, if I'm writing an email, I'll do 2 subject lines, one which highlights loss aversion, one which highlights curiosity bias, and test out the 2 and learn from my mistakes. And I think finally, there's another thing, which is that there's this perception that maybe you can only ever use one bias on one page. Your homepage should only have social proof. That's not true at all. A lot of evidence that suggests that combining these biases tends to increase their effect. If you go to booking.com, for example, they don't just use one variant of scarcity to prime people. They use like 100 and then combine it with consistency bias, loss aversion, everything else. They completely throw the book at you. And it works. It's not like when we see more than one, our brain switches off.
I think booking.com, like they tested everything. It's like super optimized.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's like it's a good example of that. Okay, you can actually get away with just using as many as you want, and it doesn't seem to have a negative impact. A small plug, so listeners tune out if you don't want to hear me plug in my own work, but I am working on something called the Nudge Vaults, which is a productized version of this huge database of all of the different nudges and biases that I've come across. 444 different examples in this vaults at the moment. I haven't released it yet. I'm planning on releasing it soon. I've got a waiting list which you can sign up for. So if you are interested in getting access to this huge database that's taken me 10 years to put together of all of these different examples.
Going back to effort again, guys. Effort.
Yeah, a bit of that. It's not available yet. I can keep going. If you are interested in that, it's just go to nudgepodcast.com. You'll find it in the menu, or go to nudgepodcast.com/vaults, and you can sign up to the waiting list, and I'll probably be emailing you with a lot more scarcity inducing tactics to make you sign up. But yeah, that's basically how I do it, and I've created a product to help other people do that as well.
Nice. Great, awesome. Yeah, so people can find you. You mentioned nudgepodcast.com, and I think you write on LinkedIn as well. Is there any other social that you're on active?
Yeah, I'm Phill Agnew on LinkedIn. Phill with 2 L's, because I love it. That's the Von Restorff effect for those who are paying attention. Nudge Podcast, look for the orange logo, it should come up, Spotify, Apple. We're also on YouTube as well. So you'll have to search for Nudge Podcast on YouTube. And we take the episodes and create sort of YouTube style videos out of them. So a YouTube video, which is fully animated and all that sort of great stuff, you can find them on YouTube too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Phill. It's been a blast. Learned a lot.
Thanks very much, Chris.
Thanks so much for listening. If the episode sparked some ideas or made you rethink how you're doing messaging, check out the Message Market Fit scorecard. It's free, quick to complete, and it'll show you exactly where your copy or strategy might be misaligned. You'll find the link in the show notes. And if you want to go deeper or just bounce ideas around, I'm always up for a chat. Hit me up on LinkedIn or Twitter @SilvestriChris. And of course, if you enjoyed the episode, leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify really helps more people discover it. That's it for this one. See you next time.